Welcome to our deep dive into the enigmatic world of the Lee family of Virginia, one of America's most storied dynasties. If you're searching for Lee family of Virginia history, Robert E. Lee family secrets, or Lees of Virginia legacy, you've come to the right place. This video uncovers the untold stories behind their rise to prominence, from colonial roots to Civil War fame, while exposing the dark secrets that have been buried for centuries. Beneath this glittering facade of military valor and political prowess lies a web of secrets that could rival the corporate feuds of the Redstones or the sealed wills of the Windsors. From profiteering off slavery on their sprawling estates to deep family estrangements and concealed genealogies that challenge official narratives, the Lees' story is far more complex than textbooks reveal. Unlike the Gould family's faded wealth, the Lees' influence endures today through landmarks like Stratford Hall and active genealogical societies, echoing the timeless longevity of the Grosvenors. In this video, we'll explore these hidden facets, drawing on historical records and expert insights to reveal how the Lee family of Virginia navigated power, scandal, and survival across generations. Whether you're a history buff interested in Virginia first families or curious about Robert E. Lee hidden history, stick around as we peel back the layers. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more uncovers on American dynasties. Let's dive in. From new money to old money. The story of the Lee family begins with Richard Lee Thwine, a determined Englishman who laid the groundwork for one of America's most influential dynasties. Born around 1618 in Shropshire, England, and christened on March 22nd of that year as the son of John Leithurst and Jane Hancock, Richard wasn't from any aristocratic background. He was a merchant's son with ambition and resilience. He arrived in the Virginia colony around 1639 or 1640 at just 21 years old, during a time when the area was bursting with raw potential but also fraught with dangers like disease, Native American conflicts, and the harsh realities of frontier life. Tobacco was the explosive cash crop of the era, much like a modern-day boom industry that drew fortune seekers from across the Atlantic. Europeans were hooked on it, and Virginia's fertile soil and climate made it ideal for cultivation. Richard started modestly, working as a clerk and trader, but he had a keen eye for opportunity. He built his holdings through the headright system, where colonists received 50 acres of land for each person they sponsored to come over. Mostly indentured servants at first, though that shifted to enslaved Africans later on. His first patent came in 1642 for 1,000 acres on the north side of the York River, and he kept expanding patents for places like War Captain's Neck, Paradise, Dividing Creek, and Machodoc. By his death in 1664, he controlled over 15,000 acres spanning Virginia and even into Maryland, with plantations teeming with activity. This wealth was quintessential new money, forged in the fires of colonial trade and agriculture, similar to how pioneers like Mary Brickell transformed Florida's untamed swamps into valuable real estate in the late 1800s, risky, hands-on ventures that demanded cunning and endurance. Richard didn't just farm, he traded tobacco for European goods, dealt in furs with local native tribes, co-owned ships for importing labor, and navigated complex relations with indigenous groups like the Powhatan. He even entered politics early, serving as clerk of the Quarter Court in the 1640s, Attorney General of Virginia in 1643, a burgess for York County from 1645, 1647 to 1648, High Sheriff Colonel in the Northumberland County Militia, and a member of the Governor's Council in 1651, and again from 1660 until his death. It was all frontier hustle in that Virginia landscape, sweaty labor in the fields, soil caked under fingernails, no inherited titles from Europe, just shrewd negotiations and relentless effort that turned tobacco leaves into a lasting family fortune. He married Anne Constable in late 1641 or early 1642 in Jamestown. She was the ward of Governor Sir Francis Wyatt, adding a touch of connection to colonial leadership. They had 10 children, including sons like Richard Lee II and Hancock Lee, who would carry the line forward, with descendants, eventually including figures like President Zachary Taylor and General Robert E. Lee. In his will from 1663, Richard detailed bequests of land, slaves, and goods, leaving 5 slaves to his widow and 10 to his eldest son, John, underscoring how his empire was built on human labor from the start. But the Lees' transformation from that new money origins to established old money status was a multi-generational masterclass in strategy, weaving together political clout, land deals, marital alliances, and cultural investments into an enduring elite tapestry. This evolution didn't happen in a flash. It unfolded over decades through calculated steps that elevated them from planters to pillars of American society. Political power was the accelerator in this rise, propelling them into the heart of nation building. Jump ahead to Richard Henry Lee, born on January 20th, 1732, at the family's majestic Stratford Hall in Westmoreland County, Virginia, to Thomas Lee and Hannah Harrison Ludwell Lee. Educated at Queen Elizabeth Grammar School in Wakefield, England, he returned to Virginia in 1753 after his parents' passing in 1750, stepping into estate management amid a politically charged atmosphere. Richard Henry was a passionate orator and thinker, inheriting the family's entrepreneurial spirit but directing it toward revolutionary ideals. He kicked off his career as a justice of the peace in Westmoreland County in 1757, then won election to the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1758, where he aligned with radicals like Patrick Henry and Samuel Adams. He authored the Westmoreland Resolution in 1766, fiercely opposing the British Stamp Act and calling for resistance against taxation without representation. By 1774, he was a delegate to the First Continental Congress, and in the second, on June 7, 1776, he introduced the historic Lee Resolution proposing independence from Britain, the very motion that paved the way for the Declaration of Independence, which he signed alongside his brother Francis Lightfoot Lee. He served as the 6th president of the Continental Congress from November 30th, 1784 to November 4th, 1785, under the Articles of Confederation, advocating for government funding through land sales in the Northwest Territory and influencing the Land Ordinance of 1785, which set up a systematic survey for Western expansion despite hurdles from native resistance and settlers. Later, as one of Virginia's first U.S. senators from 1789 to 1792, he was the second president pro tempore from April 18th to October 8th, 1792, before health forced his resignation. He'd lost fingers in a 1768 hunting accident, but never slowed his advocacy. His push for the Bill of Rights ensured protections like free speech and due process. This influence paralleled the Habsburg dynasty's vast European sway through diplomacy and alliances. Those Austrian rulers controlled empires via strategic maneuvering, much like Richard Henry shaped a fledgling republic with rhetoric and resolutions rather than swords. He was instrumental in mobilizing Virginia for the Revolution, drafting intercolonial correspondence committees, and his anti-federalist stance during ratification debates highlighted concerns over centralized power. Without his bold moves, the path to independence might have been far more tentative. Land speculation was another cornerstone in solidifying their old money prestige, turning agricultural roots into expansive territorial ambitions. Thomas Lee, Richard Henry's father, born around 1690 at Mount Pleasant on the Machodoc River in Westmoreland County, was a forward-looking leader who studied at the College of William and Mary and dove into the tobacco trade early. He held key posts like naval officer for the northern Potomac region from 1710, collecting export taxes, and agent for the Northern Neck Proprietary from 1711, overseeing vast lands between the Potomac and Rappahannock rivers. In the Virginia House of Burgesses from 1726 to 1733, representing Westmoreland, he rose to the Governor's Council in 1733, a lifelong advisory role, and acted as de facto royal governor in 1749 after William Gooch's recall, until his own death on November 14, 1750. But his visionary stroke came in 1747 when he co-founded and presided over the Ohio Company of Virginia, a speculative enterprise to claim and develop the Ohio River Valley, encompassing modern Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. They secured a royal grant for 200,000 acres initially, with potential for 300,000 more upon settling 100 families within 7 years, building forts like Fort Cumberland, trading with Native Americans such as the Shawnee in Delaware, and even inadvertently igniting tensions that led to the French and Indian War through conflicts over a territory with French claims. Thomas leveraged his council position to advance the company's interests, partnering with investors including Lawrence Washington, George Washington's half-brother, and figures like John Hanbury in London. Though Thomas died before seeing full fruition, buried at Mount Pleasant, leaving Stratford to his eldest son, Philip Ludwell Lee, his sons continued the push, opening western frontiers, amassing wealth through settlement and trade. This mirrored John D. Rockefeller's dominance via Standard Oil trusts in the 19th century, consolidating resources into monopolistic empires. For the Lees, it shifted from mere tobacco farming to grand-scale investment, acquiring tracts in what became Fairfax, Fauquier, Prince William, and Loudoun counties, towns like Leesburg named in his honor, positioning the family as pioneers of expansion. Marriages formed the unbreakable bonds that amplified their power, creating a web of elite connections across Virginia's gentry. The Lees excelled at these alliances, much like corporate mergers today. Thomas Lee wed Hannah Harrison Ludwell in May 1722. She hailed from the influential Harrison and Ludwell families, bringing wealth like Green Spring Plantation near Jamestown and bolstering social ties. Her father, Philip Ludwell II, was a colonial leader, and the union produced 11 children, 8 surviving, including revolutionaries Richard Henry and Francis Lightfoot, as well as Philip Ludwell Lee, who inherited Stratford. Hannah influenced Stratford's design, adding elegant touches. The pattern persisted. Richard Henry first married Anne Aylett in December 1757, daughter of a burgess bearing 6 children, 4 surviving like Thomas Jesse and Ludwell. After her 1768 death, he wed Anne Gaskins Pinkard in June 1769, adding 7 more, 5 surviving, 1 named for Brother Francis. Deeper ties wove with Ludwells and Carters. Philip Ludwell Lee married Elizabeth Steptoe, strengthening Ludwell links. His daughter Flora wed cousin Ludwell Lee, Richard Henry's son, in 1788. Henry Lee III, nicknamed Light Horse Harry for his cavalry exploits, first married his cousin Matilda Ludwell Lee on April 8, 1782, at Stratford, inheriting parts of the estate. After her 1790 death, He wed Anne Hill Carter in June 1793, daughter of Charles Carter of Shirley Plantation, a tobacco magnate whose family rivaled the Lees in wealth. Anne brought connections to the Randolphs and more land. These weren't mere romances, they were calculated fusions akin to Aristotle Onassis's 1968 marriage to Jackie Kennedy, merging shipping fortunes with political glamour. The Carters, with estates like Shirley holding hundreds of slaves, were tobacco titans. Ludwells, tied to governors like Philip Ludwell I, added colonial gravitas. Through these, the Lees pooled thousands of acres. Matilda's inheritance alone included Stratford portions, plus slaves, political leverage, and favors, forging a Virginia aristocracy where bloodlines ensured inherited prestige and unbreakable networks. Cultural patronage added the refined veneer to their old money aura, preserving heritage for posterity. Stratford Hall, erected by Thomas Lee in the 1730s, on land bought in 1717 as Cliff's Plantation, stood as a bold declaration of status. Completed around 1738 to 1742 in Georgian style, this two-story, H-shaped brick edifice on nearly 2,000 acres, part of the larger 15,000-acre holdings, perched on 150-foot cliffs overlooking the Potomac, featuring elaborate gardens, a private wharf for tobacco exports, a grist mill, still operational today, grinding cornmeal, outbuildings for blacksmithing and weaving, and interiors shaped by Hannah Ludwell's taste. It became a self-sufficient town supported by about 200 enslaved people. Generations maintained it, passing from Thomas to Philip Ludwell, then Henry Lee III, symbolizing family endurance. By the 20th century, after financial strains led to sales, the Robert E. Lee Memorial Association, founded by women in 1929, rescued and restored it, mirroring Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney's 1930 establishment of the Whitney Museum of American Art, with family funds to safeguard culture. Now a National Historic Landmark since 1960 and museum, Stratford offers exhibits like Stratford at the Crossroads, Atlantic Cultures and Creation of America, showcasing 18th century maps of West Africa, Lee family portraits and clothing, mourning jewelry, Native American artifacts, West African objects from the Middle Passage, and architectural gems. It highlights women like Hannah and enslaved figures such as Caesar, the chef famed for hot chocolate, and his son Caesar Jr., the postilion. The Lee Family Digital Archive, hosted there, digitizes generations of documents, letters, diaries, revolutionary papers, making it the premier online resource for Lee history, covering immigrants, patriots, and enslaved narratives. Educational programs for K-12 students explore history, science, and culture via field trips, while podcasts like Stratford Mail delve into historical letters. It's more than stone, it's active patronage, a vibrant museum drawing visitors to immerse in colonial daily life, revolutionary fervor, and the Declaration signing brothers born there, ensuring the Lee saga lives on as a dynamic American root. Yet, we can't gloss over the contested legitimacy stemming from profound slavery entanglements and Civil War divides, which cast long shadows over their achievements. From the outset, Richard Lee First's tobacco empire depended on coerced labor, starting with indentured servants, but by 1660, he imported at least 90 enslaved Africans, claiming 4,000 acres via their head rights, and his will distributed dozens more. By Thomas Lee's era, Stratford housed one of Virginia's largest enslaved populations, over 137 at Philip Ludwell Lee's 1775 death, with families in quarters performing grueling tasks. Richard Henry Lee inherited 40 slaves in 1750, owned up to 63 at his peak. And while he critiqued the slave trade, proposing a 1774 ban on imports in Congress, he retained ownership until his 1794 death, viewing it as an institution to manage rather than abolish immediately. Leap to Robert E. Lee, born January 19, 1807, at Stratford to Henry Lee III and Anne Hill Carter. He married Mary Anna Randolph Custis on June 30, 1831, at Arlington House, inheriting oversight of her father George Washington Parke Custis's estate in 1857, including vast lands, debts, and about 200 slaves, with a will mandating emancipation within 5 years. Robert philosophically deemed slavery a moral and political evil in an 1856 letter, worse for whites than blacks, believing it divinely imposed for blacks' instruction via Christian gradualism, not abrupt freedom. Yet his actions were severe. As executor, he hired out resistant slaves, jailed runaways like Wesley Norris in 1859, and reportedly ordered whippings. Accounts vary on his presence, salting wounds in one case. He freed the Custis slaves on December 29, 1862, amid war. In the Civil War, after Virginia seceded in 1861, Robert resigned his U.S. Army commission, despite opposing secession and a Union command offer, to lead Confederate forces commanding the Army of Northern Virginia from June 1862, winning at Second Bull Run, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, but losing decisively at Gettysburg, with Pickett's charges heavy toll, and surrendering to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox on April 9, 1865. He indirectly upheld slavery by fighting for the South, rejecting early prisoner exchanges, including black Union soldiers, and allowing kidnappings of free blacks. Post-war, as Washington College president, now Washington and Lee University, from 1865 until his October 12, 1870, death from a stroke, he opposed black voting rights, calling them unfit, supported Andrew Johnson's mild Reconstruction, and urged reconciliation but resisted racial equality. Family members like sons George Washington Custis Lee and William Henry Fitzhugh Lee served Confederate, while some kin like Sister Anne backed the Union, causing rifts. These elements tarnished the legacy, akin to Edward Doheny's 1920s, Teapot Dome bribery scandal sullying his oil empire, the Lees' slavery reliance and Robert's rebellion fueled ongoing debates. Emancipation devastated their finances, forcing land sales, but ethical stains persist as the grim foundation of their splendor. Richard Lee Fern's secret slave trade profits. Richard Lee Boisseries' secret slave trade profits were built on a brutal foundation that not only skyrocketed his wealth, but also cemented a legacy of power for generations of Lees. At the heart of it all was his deep dive into trading enslaved Africans, a harsh and heartbreaking business that fueled his expanding empire. By the time of his death in 1664, he had 17 enslaved people toiling on his massive 1,500-acre plantation, turning the earth and nurturing crops that generated immense riches. This trade wasn't a mere side venture. It formed the core of his success and propelled Virginia's economy into high gear. Envision the 1640s and 1650s. Virginia buzzed with a tobacco boom, that addictive leaf becoming the colony's golden ticket, exported by the ton to eager markets in Europe and bringing in fortunes for savvy growers. But cultivating tobacco was no walk in the park. It required relentless, back-breaking effort, from sowing delicate seedlings under the spring sun to meticulously harvesting, curing, and bundling the leaves for shipment. Initially, the colony depended on indentured servants from Europe, desperate souls who signed on for 4 to 7 years of grueling work in exchange for passage across the Atlantic and a slim chance at land or basic tools upon release. As tobacco fever intensified, however, these servants became scarce, many succumbing to the merciless conditions of scorching heat, rampant illnesses, or sheer physical collapse. That's when the grim pivot happened. Planters like Lee embraced lifelong enslavement of Africans, viewing them as an endless, reliable workforce that could be compelled to labor indefinitely with no hope of escape. With mortality rates skyrocketing from ailments like malaria, dysentery, and exhaustion, this forced perpetual labor appeared as a ruthless solution to sustain the cash flow and expand operations. Lee seized the opportunity without a second thought, channeling earnings from buying and selling enslaved people straight into amplifying his holdings. He went beyond merely planting tobacco. He immersed himself in importing and distributing enslaved Africans, handling them as commodities no different from the furs, pelts, or manufactured wares traded by English merchants. These actions didn't just pad his pockets, they established a sturdy platform for future Lees, bequeathing expansive territories, substantial riches, and elevated status that echoed through his lineage. It's a haunting echo of Napoleon Bonaparte's colonial raids, where the Bonapartes ravaged lands in Egypt and Europe, carting off invaluable artifacts, gleaming treasures, and seized domains to forge a family dynasty that endured long after defeats. The Lees mirrored this through the trade in human lives, amassing a fortune that rippled across eras and elevated his descendants to pivotal positions in shaping America's narrative. The story takes a devious turn here. The entire enterprise was shrewdly veiled in records as indentured servitude. Documents of the era intentionally obscured realities, categorizing enslaved Africans alongside white indentured laborers to downplay the brutality, presenting it as milder or evading nascent regulations and moral critiques from English overseers. Virginia's legal system was in its infancy, lacking definitive codes for racial slavery until the 1660s, when measures like the 1662 statute decreed that children of enslaved mothers would inherit bondage, entrenching it across generations. Prior to that, entries routinely bundled all under servants, fostering deliberate vagueness that permitted unchecked exploitation without swift repercussions. This was no careless error. It was calculated obfuscation to sanitize the trade and elude scrutiny from monarchs or clergy who might challenge its morality. Consider Jamestown's ancient ledgers and judicial entries. They documented head rights for importing laborers, allocating land per individual brought in, indifferent to whether they arrived voluntarily or in shackles. Lee's involvement surfaces repeatedly in these grants, beginning with early acquisitions of 1,000 acres near strategic waterways, ideal for tobacco cultivation, and escalating to thousands more across river valleys and prime farmlands. Still, the stark terror of perpetual captivity for Africans, devoid of any liberation route, remained concealed beneath the surface jargon. By 1705, legislation starkly distinguished servants and slaves, but in Lee's period, that deliberate murkiness facilitated enormous windfalls free from rigorous examination. To peel back layers further and conduct a genuine probe, akin to assembling a historical jigsaw, we must scrutinize Jamestown's trade logs or Lee's estate catalogs for the stark, revealing specifics of his slave trade connections. These venerable volumes, safeguarded in repositories such as historical associations and preserved colonial locales, meticulously chronicle every consignment, transaction, and docking with precision. They record vessels berthing with servants from African or Caribbean origins, manned by Dutch or English operators who seized individuals from West African locales like Angola or the Gold Coast amid conflicts or abductions. Aligning these with supplementary documents unveils the sinister blueprint. These weren't fleeting aids bound by agreements. They were ensnared eternally. Their offspring fated to identical subjugation, perpetuating an inexhaustible loop. Upon Lee's passing on March 1st, 1664, his estate appraisals enumerated assets exhaustively, encompassing those 17 enslaved individuals on his 1,500 acres, appraised akin to livestock, implements, or furnishings for inheritance. The dossiers delineate allocations to heirs and stipulate certain enslaved persons allotted to his widow solely during her unmarried state, reverting thereafter. Envision leafing through those time-worn, fragile folios in a serene repository, encountering designations or mere numerals affixed to humans gauged by vitality, maturity, or proficiencies. It's profoundly unsettling, yet it's the unassailable verity gleaned from the archives. Let's encapsulate this aptly and declare it plainly. This constitutes the slave trade that built the Lees. That's the authentic perspective. How one individual's engagement in human commerce ignited a dominant heritage, extending from colonial administration to igniting revolutionary fervor and beyond. For broader insight, juxtapose it with other infamous dynastic ascents rooted in nefarious exploits. Regard Spain's Trastamara lineage. Their opulence burgeoned via the Spanish Inquisition, wherein Ferdinand and Isabella expropriated possessions from Jews, Muslims, and converts beneath a veneer of spiritual purification, appropriating terrains, aurum, and domiciles that financed reconquests and Columbus's oceanic expeditions. This transmuted torment into treasury, paralleling how Lee transfigured fetters into familial affluence, inaugurating voyages that cyclically bolstered the very transatlantic commerce he exploited. Alternatively, examine the Windsors, Britain's sovereigns, whose imperial bounties encompassed substantial portions from slave-derived sucrose, tobacco, and cotton estates throughout the Americas. Through mechanisms like the Royal African Company, instituted in the 1670s yet deriving from antecedent practices, the monarchy sanctioned transports of myriad enslaved Africans, channeling opulence directly to regal treasuries and fortifying the sovereignty. Queen Victoria witnessed the waning phase, but the origins embedded in identical transoceanic lattices that Lee interlaced during Virginia's nascent phase. It's universally about dominions erected upon fractured existences through avarice, and the Lees seamlessly integrate their tobacco domains, resonating with Europe's despoiled realms, where exertion was extorted sans consent, energizing the aristocracy. Here's an essential observation to ponder. Richard Lee's immersion in the slave trade rests securely on copious antiquated manuscripts, such as territorial assertions, testaments, judicial chronicles, and contemporaneous narratives. No conjecture involved, the substantiation delineates his proprietorship, commercial endeavors, and utilization of head rights for labor ingress. The ruse of designating it servitude? That's ingrained in the archaic dossiers as well. Africans received nebulous appellations like servants to circumvent illuminating the burgeoning apparatus of possessing humans as chattels, evident in primordial ordinances and fugitive proclamations that conflated classifications. William Lee's secret marriage and disputed lineage. Let's dive straight into the captivating saga of William Lee's secret marriage and disputed lineage. A story laced with hidden family ties, deliberate omissions in historical records, and echoes of power, struggles that span centuries. The intrigue centers on his marriage to Alice Felton, a union that bore children but was curiously veiled and marginalized in many genealogical accounts, sparking ongoing debates even in 2025 with fresh DNA insights. Alice, born around 1650 or possibly 1655 in what may have been Richmond County, Virginia, her roots remain a point of contention among researchers, with some tying her to English immigrant families, outlived her husband, passing away about 1703 in St. Stephen's Parish, King and Queen County. As a widow, she skillfully oversaw their family estate, steering through the harsh realities of colonial existence with resilience and determination. Their marriage unfolded between 1672 and 1675 in Northumberland County, coming after Alice's initial union to Thomas Felton, who died prematurely, potentially leaving her with property assets that the new marriage helped safeguard and grow. From this partnership sprang a vibrant family line. Historical records, bolstered by in-depth descendant analyses on sites like lisasawvirginia.org and Family Search, indicate up to 9 sons and 7 daughters, featuring individuals such as Richard, born 1677, William II, 1679, Charles, 1684, John, 1680, Anne, Mary, Elizabeth, and more, their lives threading through Virginia's colonial tapestry. While some antiquated sources reduce this to merely 4 offspring, seemingly to undercut the branch's importance, the fuller picture reveals a lineage that extended into areas like Richmond and Surry counties. These heirs cultivated expansive farmlands, engaged in community governance, and participated in militia duties amid era's upheavals, adding subtle yet vital layers to Virginia's foundational history. This branch ought to have claimed a prominent place in the overarching Lee family saga, but instead it was handled like a closely guarded enigma, often buried beneath layers of selective storytelling. Regrettably, that's not the path history took. Across various genealogies, William's offspring were blatantly excised or diminished owing to festering conflicts, a reality corroborated by credible references like the Roots web page, Web 7, on William Constable Lee, which details the marriage to Alice alongside notations on how this line was routinely expunged from family chronicles. Platforms such as WikiTree and Genie reinforce this, underscoring how emerging DNA data and updated archives have reignited curiosity in this vanished segment, despite its long-standing marginalization. The root causes? Clashes spanning land entitlements to societal hierarchies, intensified by entities like the Society of the Lees of Virginia. This selective organization, comprising descendants linked to Richard Lee the Emigrant since his 1639 arrival as clerk of the Quarter Court, emerged in the early 20th century to exalt the family's revolutionary heritage, chartered to advance awareness of their independence-era feats, amass data on regional, national, and familial pasts, safeguard landmarks, and cultivate bonds via assemblies and excursions. The Society has traditionally highlighted the more illustrious strains. They organize functions at Stratford Hall, the storied Westmoreland County plantation now preserved as a historic venue by the Robert E. Lee Memorial Association. Stratford Hall, erected by Thomas Lee, one of the immigrant's sons, beginning around 1738, encompasses 1,500 acres gazing over the Potomac River. It's an exemplar of colonial design, boasting an H-shaped brick edifice, refined dependencies, manicured landscapes, an operational grist mill, and tobacco structures. This domain sheltered successive Lee generations, encompassing revolutionary stalwart Light Horse Harry Lee and his offspring, Confederate leader Robert E. Lee, born there in 1707. Designated a National Historic Landmark, it provides engrossing guided explorations, displays on the enslaved laborers who constructed and maintained it, and occasions merging familial honor with wider American chronicles, directly connecting to Declaration endorsers like Richard Henry Lee and Francis Lightfoot Lee. It stands as the radiant focal point where the preeminent Lees flourished, immersed in Independence-era splendor. Why then sideline William's descendants? It ultimately revolves around elevating those Stratford Hall heirs, conceivably to refine the tale around Declaration framers and Civil War icons like Robert E. Lee, who directed the Army of Northern Virginia. Envision a familial enterprise where one cohort monopolizes the equity, marginalizing the rest. The society's Stratford-centric lens subtly eclipsed less prominent paths. This parallels the Redstone clan's Brent buyout, a contemporary clash rife with analogies. The Redstones dominate media. Sumner Redstone crafted a multi-billion realm via Viacom, CBS, and Paramount, departing in 2020 at 97, with wealth anchored in national amusements, their private cinema network governing pivotal voting equities. The conflict erupted in 2006 as Sumner's son, Brent Redstone, litigated against him and the firm in Baltimore's state tribunal, charging self-serving actions and siphoning millions from 1970s trusts. Brent asserted he and sibling Sherry were deprived of their tripartite portion, with Sumner privileging Sherry and overtly questioning Brent's aptitude. The narrative encompassed fierce executive chamber, skirmishes, expulsions of Brent-aligned officers, and examinations of Sumner's non-agenarian cognitive state amid wellness issues and intimate controversies. They resolved in 2007. Brent secured a $240 million share redemption and withdrew the action, yet authority centralized with Sumner and Sherry, who engineered the 2019 Viacom-CBS fusion. Strains persisted into the 2010s, such as a 2016 chief executive dismissal. Its archetypal kin partiality, quelling contested assertions to preserve the dominion, akin to the Lees diminishing William to exalt Stratford, directing assets to the eminent flank. Per Webb.7, quarrels over terrain, validity, or rank consigned William's progeny to obscurity. A view mirrored on leaseoffvirginia.org, where heirs lament being robbed of their inheritance by chroniclers obsessed with insurgents. Pondering if this veers into conjecture? Valid query. Let's dissect with robust probing methods. Commence with the Library of Congress's extensive Lee pedigree assets, core artifacts like testaments, terrain conveyances from Virginia State Library assemblages, and antique kin diagrams, encompassing the 1664 testament allotting heirs terrains like the Paradise holding by the Potomac. Augment this with Edmund Jennings Lee's 1895 opus, Lees of Virginia, a voluminous 600-plus page edition issued in Philadelphia by the Franklin Printing Company. Edmund, a Stratford Scion jurist and chronicler, mapped the clan from 11th century England via the emigrant, incorporating life stories, outlines, and schemas from kin documents. However, the snag. William receives paltry coverage. A concise segment on page 52, occasionally deeming him unwed or with unsubstantiated progeny, planting skepticism that advanced the obliteration and swayed later exclusions. Contemporary rectifications on lisavirginia.org wholly endorse the strain, supported by DNA correspondences and ecclesiastical logs, but formerly it resembled annals averting gaze. Seek substantiation in St. Stephen's Church parish entries, Northumberland County judicial papers from 1675 displaying the matrimonial pledge and Thomas Felton's asset catalog or offspring rosters, Richard Lee, 1677, espoused Mary Young in 1695, establishing in Surry County. William Lee Jr., 1679, had his 1717 Richmond County Testament authenticated, devising terrain and bonded laborers connecting to primal Lee domains. Family search and ancestry repositories enumerate up to 16 Young, with authenticated ones like John, 1680, Charles, 1684, and Elizabeth Wedding natives. Delve profoundly, and it's evident, fortified by volumes like Jacqueline Finley's Lost Descendants of William Lee. Contending academics interred this legacy, and as of 2025, her series persists in challenging flawed Y-DNA interpretations that dismiss the line due to haplogroup variances. To heighten the allure, ponder how the Lees resonate with other muted ancestries in lore. Clans seldom solitary in revising their chronicles. Regard the Palaiologos kin, Byzantium's terminal sovereigns. Andreas Palaiologos, kin to Constantine in Thuin, felled in Constantinople's 1453 Ottoman downfall, concluding a 1,000-year realm, subsisted impoverished in Roman banishment under pontifical aegis, hawking artifacts like sacred icons and pondering Muslim shift or Ottoman pact for endurance. In 1494, he vended his designations, emperor and autocrat of the Romans, to France's Charles VIII for an annuity and holy war vows, predicated on recapturing Greece's Morea landmass as an anti-Turk bastion. Charles's abrupt 1498 demise from a portal-frame cranial blow thwarted it during Italian conflicts. Andreas essayed revending to Spain's Ferdinand and Isabella after Reconquista, but expired destitute in 1502. Sans legitimate issue, this merchandised the crown, obfuscating relative assertions, like sibling Manuel's Islam-adopted Ottoman assimilated posterity or continental kin. Discussions persist on its ecclesiastical legality, but it marginalized successors, preferring potent purchasers, much like Lee's prioritizing Stratford over William, demoting Byzantine assertions to diplomatic curios. Light Horse Harry Lee's secret financial ruin. Light Horse Harry Lee's secret financial ruin unfolded amid his inherited wealth and deep political connections. Yet he sorely lacked the savvy needed for sound money management, often chasing bold visions at the expense of careful planning, a vulnerability amplified by the wild speculative boom of post-revolutionary America. In those heady days, as the young nation surged westward, land emerged as the ultimate gamble for fortune, with enormous swaths opening up through federal auctions, treaties wresting territory from Native American tribes, and ambitious private schemes dangling promises of explosive profits from new settlements, farms, and trade routes. Lee, brimming with optimism and a drive to build a secure legacy for his family, dove in with both feet, seeing these opportunities as a surefire way to multiply his holdings and cement his status among Virginia's elite. His ventures kicked off in earnest around 1790, when, leveraging his position and networks, he championed the creation of Matildaville, an ambitious planned community perched at the dramatic Great Falls of the Potomac River, christened in memory of his late first wife, Matilda Ludwell Lee. This wasn't just any town. It was envisioned as a thriving industrial center, seamlessly integrated with the Potomac Navigation Company's Grand Canal Initiative, a project spearheaded by none other than George Washington to navigate around treacherous rapids and connect the fertile Ohio Valley directly to Chesapeake Bay ports. Imagine the potential: locks and waterways boosting commerce, mills grinding grain, warehouses bustling with goods, homes sprouting up for workers, Land prices were expected to explode as merchants and settlers flocked in. Lee threw himself into it personally, snapping up prime lots, pouring funds into promotion, and rallying investors with tales of inevitable prosperity. But the dream quickly soured. Chronic funding shortfalls crippled the canal construction, with investors pulling back amid economic uncertainties. Engineering hurdles, like unstable rock formations and unpredictable water levels, caused endless delays. Labor scarcities, including reliance on enslaved workers and hired hands who faced harsh conditions, further stalled progress. By the mid-1790s, Matildaville had fizzled into a near-abandoned relic, with scarcely a handful of structures ever finished. A few forges, a market house, perhaps a tavern, before the whole endeavor collapsed, leaving Lee nursing heavy losses from his sunk capital and dashed expectations. Far from deterred, Lee doubled down in 1795 by acquiring George Washington's stake in the dismal Swamp Land Company, a speculative enterprise rooted back to 1763 that aimed to tame the sprawling Great Dismal Swamp, a murky expanse bridging Virginia and North Carolina through drainage ditches, canals, and land reclamation for lucrative timber harvesting, crop cultivation, and even transportation links. He forged partnerships with fellow visionaries to secure claims on 200,000 acres flanking the Potomac for enhanced navigation projects, and a mind-boggling 1 million acres scattered across the rugged western backcountry, territories that would evolve into parts of modern Kentucky, Tennessee, and beyond, all predicated on waves of European immigrants and frontiersmen driving demand. Buoyed by the euphoric aftermath of independence, where anything seemed possible, Lee borrowed voraciously to fuel these bets from established institutions like the Bank of Alexandria, which offered loans backed by his reputation, from trusted allies in Virginia's gentry circles, extending personal notes on handshake deals, and even from more precarious sources, shadowy lenders charging steep interest in the unregulated markets of the time. He funneled the money into essential outlays, hiring surveyors to map boundaries, paying legal fees to contest overlapping claims or native disputes, and launching promotional campaigns to attract buyers, all while envisioning vast returns as civilization pushed inland. Yet, brutal economic realities soon demolished these aspirations. The Panic of 1796 to 1797 struck like a thunderbolt, marking America's inaugural major financial meltdown, ignited by an overheated land speculation bubble that popped under the weight of restricted British credit flows stemming from the ongoing Napoleonic Wars, choking global trade, exacerbated by domestic woes like poor harvests driving up food prices and shaky banking systems teetering on insufficient reserves. Overnight, property values cratered, transforming prized deeds into worthless paper as buyers vanished and foreclosures surged. This catastrophe was magnified by the high-profile downfall of Robert Morris, dubbed the financier of the Revolution for his wartime funding wizardry, who himself plummeted into bankruptcy in 1798 with debts exceeding $3 million from analogous over-leveraged land grabs, creating a ripple effect that ensnared connected borrowers like Lee through shared creditors and collapsed joint ventures. Lee's obligations ballooned uncontrollably, mounting interest on mortgages tied to Stratford Hall segments, defaulted payments from the canal fiasco, and cascading notes from the backcountry failures where promised settlers never materialized, amid frontier dangers and legal quagmires. By 1808, as Anglo-American frictions intensified en route to the War of 1812, President Thomas Jefferson, bridging their ideological gaps, reinstated Lee as a major general tasked with fortifying Virginia's militia, a post that yielded some salary and restored a sliver of dignity, but utterly failed to plug the gaping financial wounds hemorrhaging his estate. The breaking point materialized in 1809 when Henry Lighthorse Harry Lee III filed for bankruptcy, saddled with an astronomical $40,000 in arrears, translating to approximately $1,020,000 in 2025 dollars when calibrated via historical inflation metrics such as consumer price, indices tracking purchasing power shifts over centuries. This sum wasn't mere misfortune. It embodied utter devastation wholly attributable to those disastrous land speculations that had enticed him with illusions of boundless wealth but yielded only ruin, compelling forced auctions of cherished assets at rock-bottom prices and thrusting his household into precarious instability. However, the clandestine core of this saga lay in Lee's meticulous efforts to veil the catastrophe's magnitude. Revered as a revolutionary icon, the audacious cavalry leader whose maneuvers confounded redcoats, the orator who enshrined Washington's memory, his persona was inviolable in an era equating fiscal stability with moral fiber, where outright insolvency might label him imprudent or unreliable, corroding his standing as a foundational patriot. He mitigated disclosures in official declarations, potentially by reallocating properties to kin like his siblings to evade confiscation, stalling lawsuits with courtroom tactics or appeals, or deliberately understating debts in letters to uphold a facade of control. Archival evidence encompassing judicial filings and scholarly biographies referenced in outlets like Web 12 illuminates his intentional secrecy, sustained until relentless pressures, creditor pursuits, and elite gossip pried it open. Era's draconian bankruptcy laws offered no leniency, absent contemporary buffers like reorganization filings. Insolvent individuals risked indefinite incarceration pending repayment or mercy. Consequently, authorities apprehended Lee in April 1809, initially detaining him in Westmoreland County's lockup, then shuttling him to Spotsylvania before a year-long stint in Montross, Virginia's debtor's prison, a bleak bastion of iron bars and dank confines, where prisoners depended on relatives for sustenance and basics, enduring isolation and indignity. Envision the stark reversal. A once elusive warrior now ensnared by domestic chains over fiscal follies, whiling away hours authoring his Memoirs of the War in the Southern Department of the United States, a detailed 1812 publication extolling his battlefield triumphs through gripping narratives of ambushes and pursuits interspersed with barbs at adversaries like Thomas Jefferson's wartime governance. Throughout this trial, his toddler son Robert, barely 2, grew up largely fatherless, as wife Anne grappled with domestic strains, repelling debt collectors while preserving family cohesion. Freed in 1810, shattered and stripped bare, Lee uprooted to a humble Alexandria, Virginia, abode striving for recovery via literary endeavors and odd jobs, yet adversity persisted. Additional woe descended in 1812 during the War of 1812's prelude, prompting Lee to journey to Baltimore in solidarity with pal Alexander Conte Hansen, publisher of the Federal Republican, a fiery Federalist rag decrying the conflict as reckless Democratic Republican policy. Escalating animosities ignited mayhem. A pro-war horde demolished the newspaper's headquarters on June 22nd, and upon Hansen's relocation and resumption, fresh unrest flared. On July 27th, while Lee and comrades sought sanctuary in a jail per official directive, rioters breached it, unleashing ferocious violence. Lee endured a merciless pummeling, jaw fractured by bludgeons, viscera damaged, ribs cracked, face mangled into permanent scars, teetering on mortality as assailants hauled casualties outdoors for more torment, claiming one life and maiming several. Salvaged by allies, his convalescence dragged. But the traumas intensified pre-existing afflictions, spawning enduring agony and impaired movement. Besieged by unrelenting pursuers and bodily frailty, Lee deemed domestic endurance untenable. In 1813, he breached parole and embarked on voluntary banishment, voyaging to the West Indies on a Caribbean-bound ship, pursuing sanctuary from hounds, mortification, and decline. Far from idle, this was frantic evasion propelled by liabilities, disrepute, and medicinal imperatives for balmy environs to alleviate breathing and trauma woes, as physicians prescribed. He roamed isles including Barbados, Nassau's Bahamas, and conceivably Jamaica or Cuba, lodging modestly or with contacts, sustaining bonds via heartfelt missives to Anne and offspring. These epistles, safeguarded in repositories like the University of Virginia's Lee Family Papers and the American Philosophical Society, expose his anguish, deep remorse for speculations that demolished our horizons, entreaties for familial pardon amid inflicted woes, granular laments of fiscal ruin, citing squandered stakes and lingering bills, and health bulletins depicting fevers, torment, and solitude. A 1814 Barbados dispatch bemoaned reckless commitments birthing exile, cautioning heirs against echoes. He evaded full repatriation. In 1818's dawn, homeward on USS Enterprise, frailty compelled anchorage at Georgia's Cumberland Island, at Dungeness, realm of Louisa Catherine Shaw, progeny of Commander Nathaniel Greene. There, under naval medics, he perished March 25, 1818, age 62, probably from injury sequelae and infections. Interred initially with salutes, his bones relocated in 1913 to Lexington's Lee Chapel, adjoining Robert. This odyssey echoes Lucien Bonaparte's, Napoleon's sibling, who defied the sovereign on his unequal union to Alexandrine de Blechamp and anti-despotic views. In 1810, pursuing American asylum from imperial ire and plots, Lucien departed Italy, yet British vessels seized him, imprisoning in England till 1814, then Papal Rome sanctuary till demise. Akin to Lee, Lucien, a luminary, eluded kin scandals and pressures, masking facets to uphold honor, bearing kin estrangement abroad. Robert E. Lee's secret support for slavery. Robert E. Lee's secret support for slavery is a story that challenges the long-held image of him as a reluctant participant in the Confederacy, someone who supposedly fought only out of state loyalty rather than deep commitment to the institution of human bondage. But the historical record reveals a man who privately advocated for slavery's ongoing existence, seeing it as a system that, despite its flaws, served a purpose in his worldview of racial hierarchy and divine timing. He oversaw the labor and lives of nearly 200 enslaved individuals at Arlington House, enforcing discipline that included severe physical punishments for those who attempted escape, all while crafting a public persona that masked these convictions. Privately, Lee stood firmly behind the perpetuation of slavery, treating it not merely as an economic necessity, but as a provisional arrangement ordained by higher powers until some distant future resolution. Consider his detailed letter, dated December 27, 1856, penned to his wife Mary from his posting at Fort Brown, Texas, during his U.S. Army service. In this correspondence, he labels slavery a moral and political evil, applicable to any nation, conceding it's more burdensome to whites than to blacks in its societal impacts. Yet he swiftly pivots, contending that enslaved blacks in America fare far better than if they remained free in Africa, framing their bondage as a painful discipline essential for their gradual civilization under white oversight and Christian teachings. He condemns abolitionists as misguided extremists meddling with providence, asserting that only God can decree slavery's end, potentially delaying it for another 2 millennia as part of a wise, inscrutable plan. This wasn't a casual remark scribbled in haste. It represented a deliberate articulation of his philosophy, demonstrating active justification for slavery's endurance rather than mere tolerance, rooted in beliefs about racial inferiority and paternalistic control. This perspective wasn't isolated but echoed in subsequent writings that reinforced his defense of the system. A year later, on January 23, 1858, Lee composed another preserved letter analyzing a speech by former President Franklin Pierce, where he reiterates comparable ideas, recognizing slavery's evils while maintaining it's the optimal interracial framework under compassionate regulations and religious sway. He lambasts Northern abolitionists as narrow-minded fanatics oblivious to Southern complexities, cautioning that abrupt liberation would unleash disorder and societal upheaval. Sourced from family archives and historical repositories, these documents depict a figure who intellectually bolstered slavery's longevity, even while professing personal aversion, skillfully balancing admissions of imperfection to appear balanced, yet fundamentally endorsing its persistence on grounds that blacks required extended preparation for liberty, and that whites gained from the established order. These convictions manifested concretely at Arlington House, the stately property atop the Potomac that became Lee's residence following his 1831 marriage to Mariana Custis, descendant of George Washington through her father George Washington Parke Custis, the estate's prior owner. Upon Custis's 1857 passing, his testament appointed Lee executor, entrusting him with supervising approximately 200 enslaved souls, adults and youth laboring across farmlands, domestic spaces, and maintenance roles. The document mandated their emancipation within 5 years, but in the interim, Lee administered operations with a profit-driven mindset to settle inherited debts, fragmenting households by leasing workers to distant plantations for revenue, often to brutal locales in Southern Virginia. Contemporary logs, such as overseer notations and legal filings, illustrate Lee's precise monitoring of productivity, demanding peak yields from crops like tobacco and grains to stabilize finances. The severity deepened with Lee's direct handling of fugitives, exemplified by a thoroughly recorded 1859 episode underscoring his rigorous approach. 3 enslaved individuals, Wesley Norris, his sibling Mary, and a relative, escaped Arlington northward toward Liberty, but were apprehended in Maryland and returned. Per Wesley Norris's first-hand narrative in the 1866 National Anti-Slavery Standard, Lee commanded floggings, overseen as a constable delivered 50 strokes to the males and 20 to Mary, followed by saline application to wounds for amplified agony. Norris recalled Lee directing, "Lay it on well," deeming it vital correction, though Lee subsequently refuted ordering the lashes in a periodical response, asserting mere approval of confinement, corroborating testimonies from fellow enslaved witnesses, an 1859 anonymous New York Tribune submissions validated Norris's depiction. Such measures weren't anomalous. Estate documentation suggests further sanctions like prolonged shifts or familial disunctions to uphold authority and efficiency. As detailed in the New York Times analyses referencing these origins, Web 5, Lee governed these 200 bonded persons resolutely, favoring fiscal viability over humanitarian concerns, procrastinating on liberation until wartime pressures compelled compliance in 1862. This covert endorsement of slavery's sustenance contrasted sharply with Lee's meticulously shaped public facade as a hesitant Confederate, purportedly averse to disunion and engaging solely from Virginia fealty. In Reconstruction's aftermath, Confederates and chroniclers diligently refined this portrayal. Volumes like John William Jones's 1875 Personal Reminiscences of General Robert E. Lee depicted him as a pious aristocrat deeming slavery an unwelcome load he'd eagerly discard, spotlighting his post-war unity pleas. Yet this constituted intentional obfuscation, veiling his pro-slavery inclinations to fashion him a beacon of Dixieland dignity sans encumbrance. It parallels the Hohenzollern lineage, Prussian sovereigns governing Germany till 1918, who obscured their imperial brutalities. Beneath Kaiser Wilhelm II, a Hohenzollern, Teutonic troops in southwest Africa, contemporary Namibia, perpetrated genocide on Herero and Nama populations from 1904 to 1908, exterminating tens of thousands via internment sites, coerced toil, and slaughters, ostensibly for dominion growth. The dynasty and regime quashed disclosures, eradicating files and advancing civilizational pretexts, akin to how Lee's portrayal concealed his bondage backing to safeguard his stature as an upright commander. Arthur Lee's secret espionage in London. Arthur Lee, the revolutionary diplomat who doubled as a secret agent smack in the middle of London during the 1770s, feeding crucial British secrets directly to the Continental Congress and putting his neck on the line every single day. His operations were locked down with unbreakable secrecy to steer clear of the executioner's blade, drawing striking parallels to the intense espionage world of Saxe-Coburg's George V. Stick with me as we break this down detail by detail, from dissecting his hidden messages that could reshape our understanding of the Revolution, to drawing lines to age-old power plays and today's cutthroat corporate intrigue. By the time we're done, it'll be crystal clear why this story deserves the title, The Spy Who Risked All for Independence, a pulse-pounding account of bravery, cunning, and the razor-thin margin separating triumph from tragedy. Right off the bat, Arthur Lee stands out as a pivotal player in the American Revolution, juggling roles that demanded razor-sharp wits and unyielding resolve. On the surface, he was a refined diplomat representing colonial interests, engaging in high-level talks to sway opinions and secure support. But beneath that facade, he operated as a clandestine agent, embedded deep in London's power circles during the heated 1770s, when colonial unrest was erupting into full-blown war. With relations between the colonies and Britain fraying to the breaking point, Lee positioned himself among the elite decision-makers who were scheming to stamp out the uprising. Rather than sticking to negotiations, he was methodically collecting and transmitting vital British military and political blueprints to the Continental Congress. Consider the gravity of that, insights into troop deployments that could expose vulnerabilities in redcoat lines, breakdowns of supply chains that might reveal weak points for ambushes, or even hushed discussions on naval tactics that could alter outcomes in pivotal clashes like Saratoga or Yorktown. This went far beyond idle chatter. It was perilous, game-changing intelligence that armed the revolutionaries with an insider's advantage, all while Lee navigated a minefield where one slip could lead to accusations of high treason and a gruesome public hanging. Every action he took required absolute concealment to evade that deadly fate, much in the vein of how Saxe-Coburg's George V maneuvered through his own labyrinth of espionage in eras of global conflict, where personal allegiances and state secrets intertwined in ways that could dismantle monarchies. To truly appreciate the layers here, let's zero in on the development angle. Examining Arthur's correspondence from London or the Continental Congress archives to unearth those tantalizing espionage nuggets. Think of combing through bundles of aged letters penned during his London stint, where encrypted phrases or understated clues unveil his masterful spy techniques. These weren't routine diplomatic dispatches. They could harbor disguised accounts of British cabinet sessions he infiltrated, pilfered notes on reinforcements bound for Boston harbors, or foresights into clampdowns on key colonial trade routes. Align those with the Continental Congress's preserved documents, and the connections snap into focus, debates resolved, or battle plans tweaked in ways that only an on-the-ground source like Lee could enable, straight from the adversary's lair. It's akin to historical detective work, reconstructing how his disclosures shaped choices in Philadelphia, potentially tipping scales on forging pacts with France or lifting spirits in trying times. For added clarity, stack this against other shadowy undertakings across time, such as the Umayyads' merciless quelling at Karbala, where concealed schemes and savage methods crushed a revolt, reflecting the intense covertness Lee used to erode British authority from the inside, or recall Redstone's Viacom espionage drama, laden with insider agents and sly tactics to dominate media realms, resonating with how Lee stealthily shifted influence in elite settings. This all funnels into framing it as the spy who risked all for independence, spotlighting a solitary warrior gambling his existence for a nascent country's dawn. Focusing tighter, Arthur Lee's function as a secret agent in 1770s, London transcended mere information relay. It was a comprehensive intelligence endeavor calling for ironclad composure. Positioned at Britain's command hub, he mingled at elite assemblies, possibly sharing meals with aristocrats oblivious to his mental cataloging of every utterance on impending assaults or resource deficits, all earmarked for transatlantic dispatch. Relaying those British schemes to the Continental Congress entailed covertly exporting data that could spell victory or ruin, envisioned specifics on redcoat strategies to bolster New York defenses or stifle Virginia insurrections. Everything demanded airtight hiding, enveloped in deception strata, since exposure equated not mere detention but infamous execution as a betrayer. This reflects Saxe-Coburg's George V espionage, wherein regal plots entailed surveilling comrades or foes during global strife, harmonizing devotion and endurance in a secrecy tangle that might dismantle all, revisiting the development facet, scrutinizing Arthur's London missives unlocks a bounty. These epistles, crafted with prudent wording to evade doubt, might allude to rendezvous with tipsters or eavesdropped dialogues in legislative halls. Merge that with Continental Congress ledgers, and the effects emerge: proposals ratified or tactics refined per his insights, such as bracing for British advances he previewed. For analogies, examine the Umayyads' Karbala clampdown, a clandestine feat of ruthless precision, deploying spies and veiled troops to demolish an insurgency, akin to Lee's furtive disclosures, designed to dismantle British supremacy internally, or Redstone's Viacom espionage, featuring operative webs scheming for boardroom mastery, comparable to Lee's operations in salons to alter authority balances. It all converges on framing as the spy who risked all for independence, underscoring individual hazard for a loftier goal. Henry Lee IV's secret disownment after affair. Henry Lee IV, the son of the famed Revolutionary War cavalry legend Light Horse Harry Lee, getting caught in a steamy affair with his own wife's sister, Betsy McCarty, back in 1820. This wasn't some quiet fling. It led to her getting pregnant, the family disowning him in a heartbeat, and him being packed off to exile in Tennessee. The whole explosive mess got buried deep to shield the untarnished Lee honor, echoing those nasty internal squabbles in the Astor family where dirty secrets got hidden behind piles of gold. Henry Lee IV grew up under the massive shadow of his dad, Light Horse Harry, that dashing Revolutionary War hero who rode alongside George Washington as a trusted cavalry commander, and even penned those immortal words, "First in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen," in his eulogy for the first president. Henry's life looked set for glory, born into a line of Virginia aristocrats with deep roots in the nation's founding. But then came 1820, when things fell apart in the most personal way possible. He started an affair with Betsy McCarty, the younger sister of his wife, Anne. Betsy wasn't some distant acquaintance. She was woven right into the family fabric, living close by and moving in the same high society circles of Virginia's planter elite. This wasn't a one-off slip-up. The relationship heated up until Betsy ended up pregnant, igniting a firestorm of gossip that rippled through the grand plantations and elegant drawing rooms of the Old Dominion state. The Lee clan, already grappling with money troubles and the heavy burden of their patriotic pedigree, knew they couldn't let this blotch on their name go public. They straight up disowned Henry, severing him from any inheritance, stripping away his social clout, and erasing him from the family's proud narrative. That left him with no choice but to head west in what amounted to exile, settling in Tennessee where he scraped by in the shadows, miles away from the ancestral lands that had shaped his forebears. The cover-up was no accident. It was a calculated move to safeguard the Lee honor, that same honor that birthed signers of the Declaration of Independence, and later figures like Confederate General Robert E. Lee, who was actually Henry's half-brother. The family slammed the door shut, ranks closed tight to keep their reputation spotless, much in the vein of how the Astors shoved their own messy fights under the rug to hold on to their Gilded Age sparkle. In the early 19th century, Virginia was a place obsessed with honor, bloodlines, and keeping up appearances. Clans like the Lees were basically the Southern nobility, linked arm in arm with giants like Washington and Jefferson, playing key roles in building the young United States. Light Horse Harry had his share of skeletons, like crushing debts that threw him behind bars and forced fire sales of family estates. But Henry's mess was up close and deeply personal, the kind that cut to the bone. Betsy's pregnancy? In those tight-knit communities where everyone knew everyone's business, that was impossible to conceal without major fallout. Whispers turned to outright rumors, forcing the family into damage control mode. Disowning him went beyond harsh words. It meant cold, hard legal actions like slashing him out of wills, revoking land rights, and a social shunning that made staying in Virginia untenable. Off he went to Tennessee, trying to piece together a new existence, maybe through tilling the soil or putting pen to paper. But the affair's dark cloud trailed him every step. That silence held for decades. History texts zeroed in on the triumphant Lees barely touching this sideline story of downfall. It all paints a picture of a scandal hushed up to save face, linking straight to suppressions in other powerhouse families, like the Astors, where battles over cash and conduct got muffled to defend the dynasty's image. If that has you itching for more layers, you're not alone. Let's talk about how we could unearth even deeper truths behind this disownment. To get the full picture, we'd pore over Lee family correspondence, those intimate letters swapped among kin that lay bare the gut-wrenching feelings driving the choices. Picture finding notes from Light Horse Harry himself or other brothers and sisters, spilling the beans on the affair's aftermath, the raw anger bubbling up, or the logistics of bundling Henry off to his new life. Team that up with Tennessee land records, which might track his post-exile property grabs. Think deeds, tax ledgers, or courtroom papers from spots like Nashville or Paris, Tennessee, where he put down roots and passed away in 1837. Those documents could spill how he bankrolled his fresh start, maybe via scraps of inheritance that snuck through or by offloading bits of Virginia holdings. It's like assembling a jigsaw, revealing the nitty-gritty of how the banishment played out. And to crank up the intrigue, we'd stack it against other legendary family splits, like the Romanovs' Lucian exile or the Redstones' Brent buyout, all wrapped in the catchy frame of the scandal that banished a Lee to pull folks into the saga of a toppled successor. Those comparisons really breathe fire into the story, proving the Lees weren't outliers in dealing with dirt by shipping it far away and zipping lips. Take the Astor family feuds first. They were America's OG mega-rich, kicked off by John Jacob Astor, who piled up a fortune in furs and New York real estate that'd be worth billions now when he kicked the bucket in 1848. But under that glitz, cutthroat divisions. Remember the epic clash between John Jacob Astor III and cousin William Waldorf Astor in the late 1800s. They scrapped over who wore the family crown, pushing William to bolt to England in 1891, ditch his U.S. citizenship, and snag a British title. In a petty power move, he slapped up the Waldorf Hotel right next to his cousin's Astoria Hotel, a dig that eventually birthed the Waldorf Astoria after they patched things up begrudgingly. The bad blood was so toxic that papers branded William a turncoat, and the Astors muffled the mess to cling to their elite status. Fast forward to the 2000s, with Tony Marshall hauling family to court over getting iced out of multi-million-dollar trusts, blaming Dad Anthony for pulling strings on Grandma Brooke Astor, the big-time giver who splashed nearly $200 million on causes before bowing out at 105 in 2007. Anthony got nailed in 2009 for fraud and theft, messing with her mind during Alzheimer's to tweak wills his way, landing him in the slammer by 2012. These Astor dust-ups, packed disownments, courtroom brawls, and virtual banishments, all muffled to shield the clan's prestige, spot on with how the Lees clamped down on Henry's 1820 fling with Betsy, shuttling him to Tennessee to dodge any smear on their revolutionary rep. The links are crystal. Both crews put image first, ditching reconciliation to stash scandals, letting the ousted fade away. Then you've got the Romanovs' Lucian exile, a royal soap opera that nails the vibes of Henry's ousting with its mix of taboo love, family fractures, and mandatory relocation. We're zeroing in on Russia's long-reigning Romanov dynasty, but with a nod to parallels like Lucian in their web or similar blowouts. Think Grand Duke Michael Alexandrovich, brother to Tsar Nicholas II, who tied the knot morganatically with Natalia Brasova in 1912, bucking family edicts and earning exile to England, then backdoor banishment before the revolution hit. But tying into the Lucian bit, it's like Lucian Bonaparte's clash in the Napoleonic days, influencing how royals saw such messes. Lucian, Napoleon's sib, wed Alexandrine de Blechamp in 1801 against Big Bro's orders, refusing a royal divorce for dynastic gain. That sparked a huge rift. Napoleon booted him from imperial lineup, and Lucian self-exiled to Italy, got nabbed by Brits, and sat captive in England from 1810 to 1814. He hunkered down with his big family, chasing writing dreams, never patching up fully with Napoleon, who viewed the marriage as a stab at family duty. The Romanovs, with their ironclad wedding rules, treated similar slips as throne threats, like Grand Duke Paul's 1902 morganatic match that got him kicked out of Russia till 1905. These yarns spotlight dynasties, ditching members over outrageous romances, shoving them into exile to defend honor. Dead ringer for the Lees dispatching Henry to Tennessee post his affair with Betsy, turning into pregnancy and clan disgrace. The muting was crucial. Romanovs jotted internal spats in private missives, but played them down publicly, just like the Lees. Why does this pack a punch even now? In times when family skeletons tumble out left and right, Henry's yarn shows how scandals once got entombed to guard reputations. The Lees, knit to America's birth, couldn't take the blow. Light Horse Harry's debt scars were bad enough, and Henry's Betsy hookup risked toppling all. Her pregnancy? It wasn't just heart stuff. It sparked possible claims from the kid on family goods, layering legal headaches onto the cutoff. Kin letters could show begs for mercy or deep grudges, while Tennessee papers might chart his low-key close, maybe scribbling his 1832 rant, observations on the writings of Thomas Jefferson, a salty jab hinting at built-up bile. The affair timed with grief at Stratford Hall, Henry and Betsy exploiting the mess, fueling talk that shook the Lees to their core. Wrapping it, Henry Lee IV's secret 1820 affair with Betsy McCarty, sparking pregnancy, family disownment, Tennessee exile, all muffled to guard Lee honor like Astor Rose, is eternal warning. Probing letters and land files linking to Romanov's Lucian exile and Redstone's Brent buyout, tagging as the scandal that banished a Lee, it spotlights scandal's legacy shape. Affair and cutoff factual, Heidi noted.